welcome to the Chief Seas Podcast, episode number 22. It's just your boy Jarrett. No one else with me today, unfortunately, so this episode's going to be a little different, but that is A-okay. We will make do, and hopefully episode 23 should be back to usual. So this is going to be kind of a like Colin Cowherd style or like Joel Klatt or any analyst where they just kind of have their own show and they're doing their own thing. And we're going to do that in this episode. So to kind of dive into what we're going to do today, I'm going to talk about a bunch of new tips for fantasy beginners and people who are just starting fantasy football, because I know a lot of people who are just getting into it, or like Mason this year in the league, he's just getting into it, and we're going to have another new guy just getting into the league this year, and also kind of just giving some general advice for fantasy football. So to kind of give a background quick on what my credentials are, I don't know if I'm not a very, I want to say I'm not a very credible guy, but like I wouldn't say I'm like a professional or anything, but to kind of give a background of what my knowledge is in fantasy football. I've been playing for 3 years, and I've been in the championship game every year I played, and I'm a two-time fantasy champion, just coming off of a win last year. The OGs know on the Hardcount Heroes Fantasy Show that I beat Cameron in the championship game. So I have a little bit of credibility to it. I wouldn't say I have a whole lot, but to kind of talk about winning a fantasy league and like talking about what it takes to win, I feel like I have a little bit of knowledge about. So the league I play in is the Hardcount Heroes Fantasy League, and we did a lot of coverage on it last year. Not so much this year, I'm thinking. We'll probably hold off on it a little bit just because it doesn't do a whole lot well. But, if you want to hear about our fantasy league, if you want us to kind of go over our coverage about it, then let us know. But like I said, I won it twice. So I feel like I have a good perspective on kind of letting people know about fantasy football and like what there is to know. So before we get into that, I do want to say that a thing we talked about a couple episodes ago was if we were able to, it was like episode 2 or 3. Honestly, it wasn't a couple episodes ago. It was a while ago, but we talked about like being able to complete a pass in the NFL. And I just saw an Instagram post today. I think it was by House of Highlights. And it was talking about football. If you could complete 25 yards of passes, like you get 10 attempts, I think it was, and you need to complete 25 yards worth of pass yards, I guess. I mean, that's the best way to put it. And a lot of people are confident. And all I'm saying is it's a lot fucking harder than people think. It was like you get $1 million, or you have 10 attempts to get 25 yards, and then you can get 10 million. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm instantly taking the 1 million. I don't have any faith in myself to get that much. And then there was another NBA one where it was you either get $1 million up front, or you get 10 million. Oh no, I think it was 20 million if you can score 15 points in a full 48-minute NBA game. And I'm just going to say a lot of you guys are full of shit. You are not scoring 15 points, and most of us are not making it 48 minutes on the floor without, passing out or having to check out because of being tired. But that's a different point. Let me wrap back to the fantasy stuff here. So we're just going to go ahead and dive into it right away. The first tip I have is know the scoring system in your fantasy league. That's a pretty big part of understanding fantasy football. And it seems like an obvious thing, like, oh, why wouldn't I know the scoring system? I'm in the fantasy league. But a lot of different leagues have different scoring opportunities. Like, I know our league, we just changed it this year to where every yard a kicker makes a kick, it is 0.1 points. So if a kicker makes a 54-yard field goal, it is now 5.4 points. So that's just kind of important to know the scoring system in your league. And a bunch of different leagues have different things too. I mean, there's weird leagues where people have points for punters and they have points for individual defensive players and stuff like that. I mean, our league isn't that crazy. We usually just do the standard scoring besides that little kicker rule. And I believe we have an alteration to pick sixes where I believe it's -3 for a pick six, something like that. So just keep that in mind. It's very important to know the scoring system of your league and just kind of understanding the ins and outs of what the league is too. I mean, this one I didn't officially have on there, but knowing the league type is important too. Like, we are in a keeper league, so I was able to pick one of the players I had last year, and I picked Justin Jefferson, and I'm going to be able to reuse him again this year. So that's kind of what that is. A dynasty league's a little different, where you keep the same players throughout every year, and then instead of doing a reset draft every year, you do a rookie draft, kind of like the NFL. So that's a little different. That's a longer commitment, and you definitely need to think long term. I mean, I think for any fantasy league, honestly, you want to think kind of long term, but it's important to know the scoring system and know what type of league you're in and know how much people are in it. Like, if you're in an 8-man league, like we were last year, or if you're in a deeper league, like a 14-man, I mean, it's going to be a little different for everyone. So it's just important to keep that in mind. All right. Tip number 2 I have on the board is make sure you make a draft board before you do your draft. So it doesn't have to be anything super fancy. I mean, there's some people who go super in depth and they'll have spreadsheets with a bunch of stuff, a bunch of players lined up, and they have people who probably won't even get playing time throughout the year and just kind of stuff like that. I'm not saying you have to do that, but you should at least kind of get an idea of who you're going to take first, uh, depending on who's available, and like kind of frame out what you want your first 10 picks roughly, or at least your like first half of the draft, and kind of understand the ADPs, which is average draft position. Understand that. So, like, say you're picking ninth in a 12-man league, and you're looking for Justin Jefferson, and we'll use him again. He's probably not going to be the ninth pick, so don't center everything around about taking Justin Jefferson. Think more about some people who be rather more available there. And like, if you're doing a snake draft, you're going to circle back around. If you have the ninth, you'll end up having a pretty early pick in the second round too. So kind of frame your way around that. And think about positional value too. Don't get too wrapped up in positional value on the whole thing. I think I actually have that as a tip later on. But don't get too wrapped up in positional value. It's not a super important thing. It's all about taking the best guy there. So if you want a running back, like say you were dead set on taking a running back in the first round, but there's already 4 running backs off the board and you have the RB5 there, but then the wide receiver 2 is still available. I mean, I would go wide receiver 2. It just makes more sense to get the talent on there. So you really want to focus on kind of having a lot of talent on your team. So, number 3, don't be afraid to draft the best available player. And yeah, this is just what I was talking about, where you need to kind of focus on making the best talent compared to filling out positions. And now, almost every league, you're going to have a flex player, and that is a player that can be a wide receiver, running back, or tight end. Or if you're in a super flex league, you can have a quarterback in there. I mean, I'm not going to get too much into super flex since this is still kind of like a beginner tips podcast. And that's kind of a whole different beast. So, but you're going to have flex players. In our league, we do 2 flex positions. So you're able to fill those out with different players. So, I mean, don't get too focused up in like, hey, I already drafted 2 running backs here and I need to take a wide receiver. I mean, if you think a wide receiver or tight end is so good that you can't pass up on them, then don't. Pretty simple about that. So then going into number 4, don't worry about drafting a defense and a kicker right away. So when we did our draft last year, Nick, who is a former kicker himself, if you've listened to past episodes, he took Justin Tucker in like the 9th round, and there's no way you should be doing that. Kicker, I think, is slightly more important than defense, but I would not be dead caught catching, or not catching, pardon me, dead caught taking a defense in like the 10th round, just because it's a good defense, like say the Eagles defense, and you really want the Eagles defense. Don't worry about taking them because you're going to rotate through defenses every week, and almost everyone in the league does that. I mean, they might have a good matchup for the first week, and you think, oh, this is going to be a number one defense. But with the defense, it's really all about playing the matchups. And that's what I did last year. I don't remember who I took in the first round, but I mean, almost every week I'm checking the waiver wire for defensive matchups. And if they're playing a bad offense, then I'm probably taking that defense. And it's pretty important to just kind of base it around that and not get too wrapped up in making sure you have a solid defense. I mean, you're going to play that by week. So that's another tip. Tip number 6. Using handcuffs as trade bait. So this is a little bit more of a deep tip. And when I refer to handcuffs, I'm talking about you have a starting running back on your team. So, like, say I have Aaron Jones on my team from the Green Bay Packers. He's a starting running back, right? Uh, the handcuff to him would be his backup, who is AJ Dillon, which those guys are used more in kind of a tandem back role, so that's a little different. But having AJ Dillon as the handcuff is an attempt to be covered in case of an Aaron Jones injury. So if Aaron Jones tore his ACL or something, I know I'm okay and I'm not screwed out of a starting running back because now I have AJ Dillon to come up and take that spot. Is he necessarily going to be as good? Maybe not, but it's reassuring to know you have that type of coverage. But also, you can take these handcuff guys and you can use them as trade bait. So obviously, a big thing in fantasy football is trading back and forth with other players, and usually you have up until in our league it's week 11. You have a certain trade deadline, so you can trade back and forth up until week 11. And if one guy just had his star running back go down, and you happen to have the handcuff, I mean, you can use some leverage there, and you could probably get a pretty solid player out of them. So I wouldn't be afraid to use handcuffs as trade bait. It's a pretty solid idea to do going forward. So don't be afraid of that at all. All right, number 7. Just because you're familiar with your team and you have your guys doesn't mean you need to take them. So pretty well known if you've been around the block on the Cheap Seats podcast that I am a Packers fan, and so are Mason and Bryce, and Nick is a Seahawks fan. So when I'm drafting in fantasy, I rarely take Packers guys unless I think it's actual good value. Just gonna take I'm not just gonna take some random Packers wide receiver like Christian Watson. Uh, if someone else is there, like say who's a better wide receiver, probably Garrett Wilson. I mean, he's probably gonna go pretty early this year too, but I would rather take Garrett Wilson over Christian Watson, even though Christian Watson is a Packers player. I mean, having your team on your team, like having your guys on your fantasy team is nice. Like I had Aaron Rodgers when he was with the Packers for a while, 2 years ago, and you get to root for him. And then if he does good, I mean, you get fantasy points out of it, so that's also kind of nice. But if you have 5, 6 different Packers players on your team, and then you come up to a bye week, or the Packers have a bad week, I mean, you're kind of screwed. So you can't really put all your eggs in one basket in those regards. I would kind of spread it out more evenly and really get familiar with the rest of the league too. I mean, the thing about fantasy football is it's a lot of doing research about different teams in the league and kind of understanding everything else in the league besides just your team. So I think it's important to make sure that you kind of spread your eggs out evenly, like I was saying before, and make sure you don't invest in one specific team. So, number 8, know when the games are and manage your lineup almost daily, I would say. So, if you're new and you don't really watch a lot of football, the NFL has some games that aren't always on a Sunday. I mean, the majority of them are going to be Sunday, but then you have Thursday night football. So that's right at the start of the week, and you got to make sure that you check your lineup Thursday, and then make sure you're sitting anyone you don't want to play on Thursday night football, or if you have a guy in a bye week and you have a guy in a bye week and you have him in your starting lineup, and then your top running back is on Thursday night football, and you don't play him, I mean, you're going to regret that. And that happened to me like 2 years ago with Alvin Kamara. I had him in my starting lineup, and actually, no, I think that was last year. I don't remember. It was no, it was 2 years ago. It was definitely 2 years ago. I had Alvin Kamara in my starting lineup, and it was questionable if he was going to play or not. And then I missed out on it. Where I left him in, and then I got screwed because he didn't play, and then I put up 0. So it's important to manage your lineup and like kind of survey that at least daily, and then understand when the games are. I mean, there's going to be Monday night games too, so you have to kind of adapt to that. I mean, during Christmas and like late in the season, they do Saturday games, so you just need to understand when the games are, when your guys are playing, and how you want to manage that. So that's number 8. Number 9. Uh, do not bank on league made advice. Uh, so fantasy leagues, you're gonna have a lot of people that are your friends and you consider your friends, but a lot of them may not be afraid to screw you out of winning for the week or giving you purposely bad advice so they can benefit from it. So I know, not to throw anyone under the bus, but Nick has been pretty notable about. He's kind of noted in the fantasy league as being a crook or like being a deceiver, trying to screw someone over. And I'm just saying, just don't fall victim to that. I mean, take everything with a grain of salt and kind of understand that some people are going to try to help you, some people are going to try to screw you, and you need to be able to decipher that. So, do a little bit of research yourself, and that's why I mean it's even more important that you do research yourself and understand it. You just can't go off the word of everyone else, because if you try to go off the word of everyone else, people are going to take advantage of you, and you're going to end up last in the league, and then you're going to be doing a punishment, and then you're going to be looking pretty silly. So that's number 9. Do not bank on your league mate advice because you could end up getting screwed by it. Number 10, utilize the waiver wire. So every week, usually, at least in our league, I know it is Tuesday or Wednesday morning. It's like Wednesday morning at like 4 a.m. Waiver wire claims go through. And what the waiver wire is, it is basically a free agency market where there's like a queue. So you're going to have a waiver number and it's going to go 1 through whatever people are in your league. Like we had 8 last year. So you're going to have a waiver number. And that basically gives you priority to claiming a player. So, like, if one person puts in for a player, like Tony Pollard's probably gonna be on the team every time this year, but we'll just use Tony Pollard. Say he's in the free agency market. I want Tony Pollard. My waiver claim number is 4, and then we'll say someone else wants Tony Pollard, but their waiver claim number is 2. They're gonna get Tony Pollard over me, so you need to kind of understand that. But like after you make a waiver claim, you get bumped back down to the bottom. So it kind of works off of that. So use your waiver claim wisely and make sure you're monitoring the market every week and kind of understanding what the situation is and like who's the better player to pick up, who's going to fit my team this week more often. And don't just be set into keeping the same roster every week. You need to be able to let go. You need to be able to change and be flexible. I mean, that's how it was last year in fantasy football, and it turned out pretty good for me. I mean, you just got to be pretty flexible with your lineup and be able to make changes and not set to a distinct lineup. So, number 11. So, I want to talk about this is another deep one. Stick with your stash guys. And what I mean by stash guys is guys who have potential later in the season that you're not afraid to hold on to for a little bit and then wait for them to flourish. And you got to have a lot of patience when it comes to this. So, to give a prime example, last year, Travis Etienne was my stash guy. I took him later in the year. I knew they had James Robinson on the roster for a while, and there was a lot of hype around him. He was just coming off of an injury the year before. I mean, and people were saying this guy could be pretty good. He just needs an opportunity. So I held on to him. I held on to him for a while, and I wasn't patient enough though, and I released him one year, and then, or not one year, 1 week, and then I was lucky enough to scoop him up and get him back. And it worked out pretty well for me. ETN had a pretty good season. Kind of towards the middle part of the season. Later on, he did kind of fall apart, but I think you need to be comfortable with stashing some guys and like I said, you got to be fluid with your roster. You got to be able to be flexible, but maybe you need to have 1 or 2 guys deep in the bag that you're willing to pull out when you really need them. So you got to be able to wait for them to flourish. I mean, everyone's not just going to sprout out and be amazing right away. You just got to kind of see through the potential, and it's really hard to see through that potential, but you need to be able to see through the potential and then work it out that way. So that's what I got for number 11. Stick with your stash, guys. Number 12. Don't get too wrapped up in having quality backup quarterback or even a backup quarterback at all. So you really should, if you're new, you should get a staple quarterback type of guy. Like say Mahomes is there in the second round. I mean, you're probably gonna want to take Mahomes. If he's there in the first, late first, I mean, you're probably not afraid of taking Mahomes. But if you get Mahomes, in 3 rounds later, there's like, let's see, Dak Prescott on the board, or maybe Trevor Lawrence probably wouldn't be, but Trevor Lawrence on the board, and there's a better wide receiver available too, or someone in equal value. I'm taking the wide receiver, and I'll tell you why. If you're playing in a standard league like we are, kind of standard lineup league, you're only going to be using one quarterback per week, and that other guy's just going to kind of ride a bench, and he's going to take up a roster spot, and he gives you less options for your flex positions, and then your wide receiver positions, and then your running back positions too. So I only really keep a backup quarterback if I have health issues with my main quarterback, like say he's questionable. Maybe I'll put a backup quarterback on the roster. Or if it's a bye week, then I'll put a backup quarterback on the roster. But don't get too invested in keeping a backup if you're just never going to play him. So that's kind of something else to be wary of too. If you have an IR slot, I mean, that's pretty beneficial. Then you can keep your main quarterback in the IR slot if he's injured and then put your backup in. But personally, just don't like to have a backup quarterback taking up the slot. So I wouldn't bank too much on having good backup quarterback. It doesn't matter that much to me as long as you have a solid starter. So number oh no, that was 12. Sorry, number 13. This one's kind of a general one. General one. Uh, Supposed to be fun. You know, fantasy football is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be something that's enjoyed. So if you lose, I mean, it is heartbreaking. And I went through plenty of ups and downs. And honestly, like I already love football as it is, but fantasy football made football entertaining like way more than it was before. Like you get so much more invested because you have guys out there who are on your team and you care about how they do, and it has you watch games that like maybe if you're not that much into football you wouldn't watch before. And I really think it improves the experience of watching football for people who like don't really like football that much, or they say they don't, or they're just not really interested in it generally, or they don't get it. Fantasy football is a good gateway to kind of understanding more about football. I mean, I saw that happen to a lot of people who are in our fantasy league right now. I mean, they weren't really football guys, and they're like, well, I don't really understand how to play it or like how this works. So why would I play fantasy football? You play it because it's a good gateway in, and it's really fun. I mean, every time or anytime I've heard anyone else talk about fantasy football after they joined in, I mean, it's always in a positive light. So don't be afraid to try fantasy football. I mean, I think it improves the football experience a lot more. That might be a little controversial considering some people like they just can't stand people who play fantasy football when they don't, and that's all they talk about is fantasy football. So obviously you kind of have to barter and give a little bit with that one, but I honestly truly think it improves the experience of playing or not playing of watching football. So it's supposed to be fun. Enjoy the time with your league mates and don't get too wrapped up in losing. I mean, it's not the end of the day unless you take last place. Uh, and you got a bad punishment coming, but you know what? It creates good memories. So that's not something to be too upset about. Number 14, these are back to the football tips. Uh, you okay with waiting on tight ends and quarterbacks? So with the tight end market for the last couple of years, it's been your top guy, Travis Kelce, maybe Mark Andrews if you want to put him up there, and then it drops off the edge of a cliff. So what I mean by that is that if you can't get the top two guys, then don't worry about taking a tight end and filling that roster spot out until later. I mean, you're only going to start probably one tight end each week, and if you start a tight end in your flex, I mean, that's kind of weird. I wouldn't do that. I'm usually going to start a wide receiver in my flex. Uh, but be okay with waiting on a tight end. I mean, it's not that important to take one right away. If you miss out on one of the top two guys, you don't have to come back and pick another good tight end. Use that pick on a running back or a wide receiver. Use it on someone who's going to give you a little bit more point opportunities and a little more flexibility. So don't wait on, or I should say, wait on a tight end and then quarterback. What I meant by that too was don't take a quarterback in the first round. Don't do it. Uh, there's going to be people who are going to tell you to take a quarterback in the first round, and then like if you're new, you don't know anything about fantasy football, you're going to be like, that makes a lot of sense. Take a quarterback in the first round. He is like the centerpiece of the team. Don't do it. Use it on a star running back, most likely, or use it on a star wide receiver if you want to. But taking a quarterback in the first round is like a universal no in most fantasy leagues, unless you're playing in a super flex league or two quarterback league. But if you're in a standard league, usually it's a no for taking a quarterback in the first round. So that leads me to the last tip I have lined up. I mean, this episode might be a little bit shorter just considering it's me, and I'm going to get kind of winded just spouting out all this stuff. So we're going to get to the last tip, though, which is wide receivers are the meta nowadays. You might have some people tell you different, but the results from the zero RB strategy, which is you don't take running back at all in the first 5 rounds and then you go after that. It's a bold strategy, but I've seen it work. I've seen it work before. Now, typically, I don't really do that, but I am very comfortable with taking quality wide receivers on the first and the second and the third round and stacking out those two wide receiver spots in a flex spot rather than making a subpar running back, or like someone who's questionable with injury all the time. Now, I think it is important to get at least one staple piece running back, one guy who's is going to be a workhorse, who's going to take over 70% of the workload, and a guy who's going to be in there every week. I think that is kind of important to do. Like, I traded for Saquon Barkley last year, and he was my workhorse guy, and he did pretty solid for me. I mean, I have James Conner too. He was a good piece. He brought a lot of fantasy value late in the season. That was another trade piece. So, like, I guess this is kind of a side tangent, but this is an additional tip. Don't be afraid to make some trades and kind of move around. And like I said, don't stick to your one team because trades can benefit you. And like they benefited me last year. I was kind of middle of the pack most of the year. I think I finished the fantasy season out. I want to say, I don't remember what I did, but it was just above 500. And was it 14 game season? 15 game season, something like that. It's like 8-7, I think. And what happened with that is that I made some trades around the trade deadline. I brought in Barkley, I brought in Connor, I shipped out Swift and Fournette, and then I benefited quite a bit from it. So I mean, don't be afraid to make some trades and kind of change everything up if you think it's necessary. But also, there's a caveat to that where if your team's not performing well after week 1, don't ship away everyone. I mean, give it some time to set in. Prime trade weeks are probably going to be from about week 4 all the way to week 11. That's probably anywhere I'd be comfortable trading in. Obviously, if you have a 1-3 start, or if you start 0-4, then I would, kind of raise the red flag, be a little alarmed. But if you're doing okay, you're sitting 2-2, you're sitting 3-1. I mean, I'm not going to ship anyone out. I'm not going to jump the gun on that either. So it's a pretty happy balanced situation where you just need to be kind of in the middle of everything there. So, like I was saying about the wide receivers being the meta, uh, a lot of people now are using wide receivers in their flex spots, and I honestly like that more than using a running back in the flex spot. Like I'll take a guy who's, especially in a PPR league, like I forgot to mention at the start, or a PPR standard scoring league, so point per reception. That means wide receivers are a lot more beneficial in PPR, or you got to get a pass catching running back. But usually I'll put a wide receiver in the flex, and I think there's a greater abundance of good wide receivers than there are running backs. So use that information how you will. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the compiled list of fantasy advice I have for beginners coming into the 2023 fantasy season. We're going to be looking to do some fantasy coverage and probably talk more about fantasy football later in the year once we get started up. We'll probably do an update of it every week on Cheap Seats. Don't expect the Hardcount Heroes Fantasy Show to be a standalone show anymore. It's just not very feasible when we already have this show, and it's also kind of hard to do 2 podcasts per week when usually with full transparency I edit every episode, and it's just kind of hard to like I should say record and then edit 2 episodes in a week. So don't expect that to be a standalone show again, but we will implement it into here and we will do it on the TikTok. So looking forward to that. Besides that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for cracking pretty close to 1,800 here on the TikTok. So, I mean, that's been popping off. If you've been watching on the TikTok, we appreciate it. And if you do that, I mean, you should come back over to the YouTube, subscribe. I'll drop more fantasy tips throughout the year as we get closer and closer. Obviously, I don't want to pull everything out of my bag because my league mates can also get access to this, but just a little tap into the wisdom of what I have. And like, if you guys like these kind of standalone episodes, let me know. I mean, I can make a whole different sideshow. This was just kind of a fill-in thing regarding the absence of other people. I mean, everyone's kind of got stuff going on, so I thought I'd step up to the plate and do my duty and kind of fill it out. So we'll probably be back with a normal episode next week, I'm thinking, but it was fun doing something different. It was fun giving out some of this advice, and I enjoyed it. So, last thing, use promo code Hardcount Heroes at w.gg for 10% off. I mean, we read it every episode. Somebody's got to start using it. I mean, it's not too bad of stuff. I like it myself. I got the push and punch, and W is pretty clean energy. So that is code Hardcount Heroes, HARDCOUNTHEROES. Hardcount Heroes for 10% off at w.gg. Usually this is the time where I would ask if anyone has any last words for this episode. But it's just me. So I will say for my closing words, wish everyone luck in the 2023 fantasy season. I hope you dominate your leagues. And I will say that I'm going for a three-peat, and hopefully I will succeed. So if you're a league mate listening to this, you're about to get your ass kicked. All right. Goodbye.